I think I missed the order up. My name is Bryan, and I'm from Warner Robins, Georgia. Not the sexiest city, and yet God is doing powerful things in spite of that. I want to share with you my theory on church planting, and that is of right now. I don't want to pretend that these are hard and fast rules because they're growing in the process, but this is things that I'm convicted of at this moment. There's a lot of different ways to do church planting, but I believe the most important core thing is to start with disciples. I think we understand that not all members are disciples, and a lot of individuals that embark on church planting embark on it for reasons other than purely sharing Jesus and growing his kingdom. But that has to be the motivation, and it has to start with healthy members. So I believe that a disciple multiplies himself, and out of that multiplication, we see church planting. I want to share a story. For those of you that were, before I get into that, I believe you're probably all familiar with Christ's method. I believe that Christ's method has to be employed individually and at every level of church planting. And when Christ's method is infused with the Holy Spirit through prayer, I believe the result looks like the prototypical church that we see at the end of Acts chapter 2. You guys are pastors, so I'm going to assume you're already familiar with it, unless your name is Mark Tamalea and you don't read the Bible enough. Last year, I had the privilege of sharing with those who came to E-Huddle about how God had moved within our congregation in Warner Robins to take us from a dying church to a thriving church. We were able to build, at that time we were on the brink of, and God made it a reality, we were able to move from the property you see. Does this have a pointer? No? All right, we were able to move across the street from that small property on the left to the one on the right. We went from a 8-acre property to a 15-acre property. We went from a 4-acre property to a 15-acre property. We went from 8,000 square feet to 40,000 square feet. And more importantly was the souls. We went from a church in a span of about 4 years. We went from a church that had about 20 to 30 weekly to 200 to 300 weekly attendance. And I'm happy about that because it's not about numbers. It's about the fact that we're effectively reaching our community, because the majority of our growth was evangelistic, not transfer of membership. Nothing against that, but we were out here trying to impact the community for Christ. So I want to share, though, how in that process, in the midst of that story, there's a deeper inside story of how God planted a church. Because this is all an English-speaking congregation, but we planted a Spanish church in the midst of that story. And as I mentioned, we had to start with disciples. So you see that circle or that square. That square is going to represent, wherever you see that square, it represents the protagonist in this story. It's a disciple couple called Marks and Mildred. There they are in that circle. They're modern day Aquila and Priscilla. They're sitting there in a dying English church on a high Sabbath. And it's a high Sabbath because they took a picture that day because it was a high Sabbath. Right? So there's the evidence of the high Sabbath, and they're not understanding much of what is being said, but it's the only church, the Adventist church, that they can attend because there's no Adventist church for about an hour away in Spanish, and there's no Hispanic Adventist presence for about 8 surrounding counties bordering there. When I got to that church, we invited them over to the house for lunch one day, and I'm Hispanic as well, I'm Colombian, and we started talking about our desire to start a Spanish ministry or to start a Spanish group. So we said, hey, the next The first family or individual we meet, they're the only Hispanics in the church. The first family or individuals that we meet that speak Spanish and are willing to get together to study the Bible, we're going to start meeting on Friday nights at my house. He was with it. We started doing that. We prayed about it. Before you know it, God brought a family. Then he brought another. Then he brought another. So next thing you know, we got about 4 or 5 families meeting up weekly, praying, doing life together, mingling, laughing, crying, eating, doing it all together, and we start to grow. When we get to about 5 families, we decide we're going to implant it in a storage room in the church. So this is our first Sabbath in the storage room in the church. Missing there are the kids, because these families all have kids. The church only had the 2 daughters at that point. Well, no, they had about 4 kids. 2 of them were the daughters of this couple. The day that we planted that in the church, we brought an additional 8 kids. So the church immediately went from 4 kids to 12. So they're not in that picture because they're in class. This is just a Sabbath morning Bible study when we implanted it. There was no sermon. When we got to about 20 people, we put a screen in the room, and we started playing sermons of your favorite Spanish preachers during the worship service time, right? Bullon, Barrios, Roger Hernandez, just different people, Arnaldo Cruz. When anybody Mark Tamaleo wouldn't listen to, and when that got going and we got to about 30 people, then I started asking preachers. We started getting lay preachers to drive down from Atlanta, about an hour and a half, 2 hours down, to preach to them. And by God's grace, the group went growing. It started growing, right? This is about the start when we started bringing preachers out. By God's grace, now, once again, infusing it with nothing but Christ's method and prayer. God continued to grow year through year, 2019, 2020. Now, what happens in 2020? We get hit with COVID, right? So for a while, we had to stop. Just for a couple of months. But then we realized, hold on, we're Hispanic. We're not allergic to the scorching sun, right? So we said, we're just going to meet outside. So we started meeting outside. Now, here's the interesting thing that happened. God has a sense of humor, because we didn't realize when we were meeting outside that God actually had us looking at the building that they would one day be occupying. If you look in the backdrop, in the background, there's a building over there just on the other side of the Jordan, and we didn't realize it. We're out there taking on this heat, and God's got us looking at facing our future. Now, what happens during that period is we continue to grow during COVID, and when we come back from COVID, they no longer fit in that storage room, so now they got to meet in the fellowship hall of the church. And most of the growth in there, once again, is just community, people coming out, because we're just working the community. Now, one thing I forgot to mention, or I didn't necessarily mention, yeah, we kept growing through early 2023. One thing I didn't mention was this. The mother church, which is the English Warner Robins Seventh-day Adventist Church, was fully supportive. They were not only supportive, they didn't hold back any resources. They didn't sit there and get territorial as it grew. As a matter of fact, there was this moment, they were inspired by the evangelistic growth, and there was this moment when I knew that even though they were not growing evangelistically yet, they were growing in transfers, but I distinguished the two. They were not growing evangelistically yet, but there was this moment when I knew they were about to take off. It's when we sat in a board meeting, and one of the elders, this lady who had been there for a long time, she said to the board, she goes, you know what? This group is growing so fast that they're hardly fitting in the fellowship hall, and I think we're going to need to give them the sanctuary so they can continue to grow, because we easily fit in the fellowship hall. And while I knew that it would be problematic and maybe disrupt the harmony if I moved the Hispanics out of the land of Goshen, I realized that we were getting ready to take off because her heart was in the right place. The room's heart was in the right place. They understood the gospel, and they were about mission. And that's exactly what happened. They began to work themselves inspired. They began to grow themselves, and quickly they not only matched the energy of the Spanish group, but they actually surpassed it and grew quicker. This was in 2019, beginning of 2019. By the end of 2019, the church was full. And then COVID hits, and we need to grow. We need another space, and we can't find it. There's no church for sale in the city. We don't have any money anyways. All the money that comes in, we're putting right back into evangelism. COVID hits. Well, we wound up having to do multiple services, 3 services back to back. Anyways, long story. Let me keep moving. So both groups are growing and are on fire. This building comes up. We purchase it. God does a miracle with that. Also, it was being sold for 2.6 million. We wound up buying it for 1.4. And they had to leave everything inside and include it. Now, the front building that you see is actually about the same size as the back building. You just can't tell, but it needed a lot of work. So when we moved over into that property, the English group met in the back building. The Spanish group had to meet beside them in a adjacent room there until we finished renovating it. So this is what it looked like when they were meeting. This is the first Sabbath in the new property. This was later on that year, but then in September, we got to actually finish renovating. Well, not finish renovating, get it up to par so that we could open. We inaugurated it in the front. It was a great Sabbath, a high Sabbath. You see this disciple family right here? Only Hispanic family. Just a few years earlier, now they're cutting the ribbon because nobody else deserves to cut it but them. This family of disciples, they planted that church. We helped, but they planted. The church has a healthy identity because it's not pastor dependent. Now, here's the beautiful thing. I say a family of disciples because while the parents are all in it, so are the kids. This is a picture of the youth going out into the very community, inviting people to the grand opening who came out in number. The community came out in number for it. So I love this little graphic here because this is the gospel. This is how it started, and this is how it's going. The first Sabbath in the new building was beautiful, but it was not the end. It was just the beginning. It's been growing since then. It went great, as did our first evangelistic campaign just a couple months ago. And you would think, well, we've been rolling for a few years. Why are you just doing an evangelistic campaign? Because just to be honest, I love public evangelism and public evangelism campaigns. But if all you're doing is slapping a date on a calendar, you're not doing nothing. We grew through personal evangelism, through connection with our relationship, through relevance in our community. And then when we do, and this is on the English side, and now when we do evangelistic campaigns, they always hit because we always have people from the community coming on already. You don't have to worry. You don't have to have the opening night jitters. They're coming. Anyway, somebody's going to be ready to make a decision. So when we did the evangelistic campaign last year, 2 months ago, this is how it looked. At the end of that campaign, we didn't have a fall off. Yeah, we had good baptisms and everything, but we didn't have a fall off. It's actually been growing more weekly ever since. Now, this is a picture at the evangelistic campaign. The gentleman there in the gray coat was one of our visitors. He stumbled in for the first time. He came for the food. He told us he came for the food because we advertised a flyer. Let me see if I can get it here. This is our advertisement flyer, front, side, and back. And the food is for sale because in the Hispanic community, we felt like we could get more people out if they were going to buy it and then feel like it was bait. So he came to buy the food, but he was received, he said, with such love. He would go back on Facebook and talk about how loving the church was and how good the food was. He was received with such love, they decided to come in and stay. He kept coming night after night. I forgot to mention, he is a Pentecostal pastor. He kept coming night after night with visitors and friends, got up for the baptism appeal, came forward, got cold feet as he started thinking, as the day drew, and he started thinking about the implication of it. But he hasn't stopped coming. We've been studying. We keep working through the scenario. This guy comes with a handful of visitors every week for the last 2 months. And I believe very soon we might have another powerful minister of the Three Angels message. But what I love is that family, you could see them sitting there with him. They received him. They don't come to church with empty spots in their cars. You understand what I'm saying? They just love the Lord. They love the gospel, and they're working for it. This is how we do. This is our outreach right here, right? Christ's method. It's this type of stuff. This is how we promote it. I shared this last year, but with our Spanish group, this is how we've grown it right here. We do events like sporting outings, food, festivals for the community, concerts, mental health series, financial literacy classes. This is what we go to doors with. This is what we go to doors with. The community already knows us, So then, and we use Facebook advertising for a lot of it. That's how the pastor had seen it. So then when they see evangelistic event that pops up on their feed, they've already seen a lot of events that feed, that are for the community. Their guard is down, and people show us a lot of love. There goes this family again. Look, working hard at outreach, right? Now they're sitting back, they're having conversations, they're connecting with people. The kids ministry grew exponentially during this time, not just in English and Spanish. This is one of the unintended consequences of church planting, is that the mother church caught fire. The mother church grew with kids as well. And this is the mother church. You saw the first picture on a high Sabbath. This is what our high Sabbaths look like now, by God's grace. And this is on the English side. What I'm saying is that church planting also revitalizes the mother church. I believe mother churches are good if they're healthy. If it's not healthy, look, you don't plant a church with unhealthy individuals. And a mother church that is unhealthy, reproducing its culture, is not going to be good. But anyways, let me keep moving, because I got to end this thing. God is doing signs and wonders. All this stuff in Acts chapter 2, we're seeing in our little town. We're Acts chapter 2024. One of the ladies that was coming to the group, her name was Dora. We sparked a friendship with her. She lived around the corner from us. My wife was doing Bible studies with her. Dora was a cancer survivor. The cancer came back. She has a 7-year-old or a 6-year-old son. And Dora was, needless to say, she was nervous. As we're doing studies, this theme would come up oftentimes. And we tried to tell her to put it in God's hands. She went through, sadly, she had breast removed. She went through chemo. She went through radiation. It seems to go away. We had her baptism coming up in 2 weeks. The cancer came back, spread through all her body, and she had a mass in the back of her chest. And she said, we cannot wait 2 weeks. With what we just heard from the doctor, I think we're going to need to get baptized this week. And we're going to dedicate my child this week. And my husband, who's never been to a church, is going to church with us this week, because we don't know if we have another. We took her. We baptized her that day. Unfortunately, I had to be in my other church. I had pastored another church far away. So I had to go there. So I did the baptism. We did child dedication. I asked the elders of the Spanish group to lay hands and to pray for her. Oh, Tito, this powerful, Marx, we know him as Tito in Spanish, but Marx. He's a janitor. My mother always taught me that you treat the janitor with the same respect you treat the president, or the custodian with the same respect and dignity you treat the CEO. And my mother cleaned houses for a living, and she's the most godly person I know. Well, Tito, I said, you have to pray. He didn't feel, he didn't feel ready to pray. He's the head deacon. No. You have to pray, brother. God hears your prayers clearly. You pray for her, because I got to go. Tito stayed. He prayed. My wife accompanied her to the doctor about a week later. They could not find cancer anywhere in her body. My wife asked the doctor, what does that mean? That's not medical. What do you mean you can't locate it? He said, well, what had spread through the lymph nodes, we could have confused that possibly with an infection. But there's no explanation for the mass that was in her chest that is completely undetectable. God's doing the same things he was doing in Acts 2, and it's powerful. So this is last Sabbath. This is appeal. So you would think, so we ride off in the sunset, story over. Well, just not quite, because a disciple doesn't go into retirement. Mark's started a new group in a town 30 minutes away, Fort Valley, where we have to transfer people all the time. We've just finished our 22nd Bible study with them. We do it at about 10 o'clock at night when they get off of work. We've had about 20 people. That's a mission group now. What did you say? The baby was born pregnant? Hey, the baby was born pregnant. And therefore, this mission group right here is launching with its own worship service. We're launching their worship service, starting them as a church next month, and we're doing one in Macon, Georgia, before the end of the year. We had 8 counties surrounding us with no Adventist presence. By the end of this year, there should only be 5 left. Doing life together, church plant training at our church for our small group leaders. God is doing powerful things. It starts with disciples. There's a few important principles about church planning, but I'm out of time. God bless you.